everyone, welcome back to another video of my opinion about classical music. If you are a new viewer, welcome. If you are an old viewer, welcome back. I appreciate having all of you here. If you would like to subscribe, I would be very happy if you did so. And if you would like the video, press the like button. If you don't like the video, tell me why in the comments below. Also let me know what you think about the intro, I'm very proud of it. So, over to today's video. Today we are talking about the String Quartet by Beethoven. More specifically, Opus 18, number 4, second movement. I did an analysis of this for class about a year back, and I found some really interesting things. And all of those interesting things had to do with fragments. Now you might ask, what is a fragment in music? So if you've heard about a melody, then you think, what is a melody made out of? Which usually is themes. But then you can ask, what is a theme made out of? And there you have it, that's a fragment. Let's start, for instance, by looking at the very first line in this piece. Let's just look at the second violin for a bit. Ignore the viola interrupting. This long stretch you see here, I would consider this the first part of the melody. It consists of two themes, but between those two themes, Beethoven has only used 3 fragments, which are building blocks of music that are slightly larger than notes. Actually, in this whole entire piece, he's only used 4 fragments and 5 derivative fragments based on those 4 original fragments. And to top it all off, all the fragments are somehow related. Let's start by looking at the relationship between the 4 main fragments. So to start off, I want to mention that all the fragments I'm talking about in this video are rhythmical fragments. So pitches have not been taken into consideration when choosing to analyze this way. So, the green fragment is actually the main fragment of the entire piece. And why do I say that? I say that because all the other fragments can be built from the green fragment. So if we start with the green fragment, to create the red fragment from that, all you do is you split up the quarter note into 2 eighth notes, or we remove the slur between notes. And then similarly, when we go from the red fragment to the blue fragment, all we do is we take the last 8th note and split it into 2 16th notes. And then as we go to the yellow fragment, we just take the remaining 8th notes and split them also into 16th notes. So we go from da da to da 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 to da 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 to da 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 da. So the durations get shorter and more frequent as we move to the right in this table. So in a way we go from slow to fast. So if you paid attention in my Claire de Lune video, you will know that when you get a higher amount of notes played in a certain amount of time, the feeling of the piece also speeds up. Like, yes, obviously you have to play faster because there's more notes to fill the time with, but the time also speeds up for the listener. And Beethoven, throughout the piece really, is really good at to use the fragments to get the feeling of pushing and pulling on the tempo. Even though, if you have a good quartet at least, the tempo stays pretty much the same throughout. He's also made use of this in the first 4 bars of the melody. The first bar is the red fragment, and then he speeds it up slightly by moving to the right, and adding the blue fragment, and then finally the yellow fragment, which is the fastest fragment. But then he goes back to the red fragment, which makes this kind of wave pattern. And because of the way he's repeated the melody with canon in between the different instruments, the wave pattern kind of sets the mood for the piece. The wave pattern theme starts in the second violin, and then you have the viola coming in with the same theme, and then finally the first violin. The cello also starts the wave pattern, but it goes back sooner, and that's probably because you get the feeling of the wave pattern in the rest of the music anyway. Well, now that I've been talking for 5 minutes straight, I'm sure you're anxious to get to listen to something. Let's listen from the beginning up to bar 32. And while we do that, I want you to pay attention to where the melody comes in the different instruments, as well as how fast it feels like it's going. Does it in general speed up throughout this whole part, or does it slow down? Let's listen. So, what did you think? Did it speed up or did it slow down? Before I reveal what I think, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Pause the video and write down what you think. Got it? Okay, here's what I think. Personally, I think it sped up. It actually speeds up until the very last 2 bars, and then suddenly in the last bar it slows down dramatically. I want to emphasize that there's no right and wrong here, it's just what I'm feeling as I'm listening to it, and you're very allowed to not feel the same as I do. This is not exact science, to put it that way. And now for the next bit I want to talk about, and that is of course the derivative fragments. We actually got our first derivative fragment in the part we just listened to, and that's the pink derivative fragment. It comes from the red fragment, and what we do to change the red fragment into the pink fragment is that we make the second 8th note slightly longer and the third 8th note slightly shorter. And it sounds kind of like this. Da da da. Which isn't too different from the red fragment, which we heard before. Da da da. But it also kind of reminds us about this lavender fragment and the purple fragment, even though they are actually deviated from the blue main fragment. Even though we could kind of argue that the lavender fragment is actually related to the red fragment. The lavender fragment sounds like this. Da 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 da. So it's actually kind of a mix between the pink and the blue fragment. The same also applies for the purple fragment, which sounds like this. Da 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 da. You kind of take the vibe of the pink fragment, but you speed up the last half of it. But I still choose to relate it to the blue fragment because it has the same shape with a long note followed by a short note. The purple fragment though could also kind of be related to the yellow fragment because you have the 16th notes that are more apparent in the yellow fragment. But I feel like that's a bit more of a stretch. So then there's only 2 derivative fragments we haven't talked about, and that's the light blue derivative fragment and the orange derivative fragment. And those 2 actually are kind of similar. Both are a long note followed by 3 shorter notes. So then you may ask, why didn't I put both of them under the same main fragment? And the reason is mainly because of how we have to divide the different beats to get the different fragments. If we start with the light blue fragment, to get to it from the blue fragment, you first merge the first 2 notes, and then you split up the 2 16th notes into 1 16th note and 2 32nd notes. So if we ignore the trill that's always played when this fragment shows up, it should sound like this. Da 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 da. Now if we quickly compare that to the orange fragment, which sounds like this. Da 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 da. I don't know if it's obvious to everyone else, but to me it's pretty obvious that these are not the same kind of fragments, even though they have the same shape in a way. To make the orange fragment, you compress the first 3 notes of the yellow fragment into 1 longer note, and then you just play the rest of the fragments. But if you were to create the orange fragment from the blue fragment, you would have to first merge the first two eighth notes, and then you would take 25% of that out and then play it. And I don't know what you think, but I think that's definitely more difficult than it has to be. And the main reason why I think the orange fragment is related to the yellow fragment and not the blue fragment. So I've been going on about fragments for about 10 minutes now, and that's really just because I love how Beethoven uses fragments, especially in this piece, but also in other pieces. The first example I can think of off the top of my head is the first movement of the Fifth Symphony. The fragment here is of course the most famous da-da-da, which apparently is supposed to represent fate knocking on the door. Do let me know in the comments if you want me to look at Beethoven 5 at some point. But anyway, back to my favorite parts. The fragments, as I mentioned, but also there's this really great part that I really like that uses the red fragment the most. Actually, now that I think about it, both the parts I really like in this piece are using the red fragment. The first of the two is this part. I guess I just really like the way the chords move and the way it builds up to this point before just falling apart again. It's kind of reminiscent of what's been happening in the whole piece and also in how the fragments work throughout the piece. The second part I really like is this right here. I like how they trade off being in focus and how the sound passes through the string quartet. It is relatively simple, but it provides a place of peace in this movement, a break from the wave pattern that I mentioned before. I actually utilized these two specific parts quite a lot in a piece I composed that was an answer to this piece. I'll link that in the description for those of you who are interested, but basically I've taken this part here and flipped it so it's coming the other way. It kind of breaks apart instead of builds up, which I thought would be funny to do because it's kind of the opposite of what Beethoven is doing here. He's always building up and then going back to scratch and then building up again. So I think actually that was all I had to say. Let's listen to the whole piece actually before the video ends. I will have all the colors of the fragments in the score, which took forever to draw on, so I hope you'll appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I hope you will subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and that you will like the video if you liked the video. If you didn't like the video, leave a comment on how I can improve. Feel free to suggest new pieces for me to talk about. I love hearing your ideas. Just check that it's in the public domain and that it has a recording on IMSLP that I can use. So thank you so much for watching, and here is the entire movement. I'll see you next time.